We weren't strangers. In fact, we were the opposite of strangers. For 10 years, we existed in this space that hovered between friendship and something more. No one ever asked if we were a couple. They assumed we were. And we let them. He never asked me out. I never confessed my feelings. We just were. Late-night talks, morning coffees, shared glances across crowded rooms, long drives in silence. I was his emergency contact, his +1 for every event that didn't involve family. When his father died, I held his hand through the funeral. When my dog passed away, he slept on my couch for 3 nights straight just to make sure I wasn't alone. Everything pointed to love, except the words. Still, I waited. For years, I waited. For the courage from either one of us to make the leap. For something to break the balance and push us toward a future I was so sure we both saw. And then one day, the mail came. I thought it was a bill at first, standard white envelope with our company's logo on the top corner. We worked at the same firm. Sometimes the admin team slipped personal mail into the internal delivery by accident. But when I opened it, the breath left my body. His name. In bold gold letters. Right beneath it, another name, Caroline Foster. I didn't know who she was. Never heard of her. Never seen her picture. She wasn't one of our colleagues. Not someone he mentioned in passing. Nothing. The date was 2 months away. The venue, some lakeside estate just outside the city. I scanned the page again and again, convinced I had misread it. But it was clear. His wedding was booked. To someone else. And I had just received the invitation. I didn't cry, not at first. My body went still. Like my mind couldn't register the betrayal. Like it needed a few seconds to confirm that this wasn't a prank or some elaborate mistake. But it wasn't. I stared at the glossy card for what felt like hours. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering. My name was written neatly on the envelope. No note inside. Just the invite. No explanation. No warning. No conversation. I checked my phone. A single text from him. Sent the same day the invitation arrived. I hope you'll come. That was it. No context. No acknowledgement of what this meant. No mention of the fact that we had shared 10 years of unspoken love, or, at least, I thought we had. I didn't respond. I didn't text, didn't call, didn't ask why. I stayed quiet. The silence wasn't strength. It wasn't strategy. It was heartbreak. I felt it physically, the tightness in my throat, the dull ache in my chest, the way my stomach turned at the sight of his name. I wasn't prepared for this pain because I hadn't seen it coming. The next morning, I went to work like normal. I sat at my desk. He walked in and nodded at me like nothing had changed. He even brought me coffee, the usual, with 1 sugar and a dash of oat milk. I smiled, because that's what you do when you're drowning in an office full of people. You smile. He lingered beside my desk. So, what do you think? I didn't answer. He gave a nervous laugh. The venue's nice, right? Caroline really wanted something by the water. I looked up at him. Yeah, I said. Sounds nice. That was all. He waited, maybe hoping for a reaction, maybe expecting a fight, maybe bracing for my disappointment. But I gave him nothing. Just silence. The days that followed were blurry. My friends asked if I was okay. I told them yes. I wasn't. But I didn't want pity. I didn't want anyone to tell me he wasn't worth it. Because he had been worth it, at least to me. Sometimes, I caught him watching me in the office. Like he was searching for a sign. But I kept my expression still. My face became a mask. One I wore perfectly. 2 weeks before the wedding, he sent another text. Are you coming? I stared at it. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Then typed again. And deleted again. I didn't answer. A few days later, he stopped me in the hallway. You've been quiet, he said. I met his eyes, the same eyes I used to know so well. Not much to say, I replied. Are we okay? I smiled faintly. You're getting married, remember? Everything's perfect. He looked unsettled. Like he couldn't understand why I wasn't fighting. Why I wasn't begging for a reason, a last-minute change of heart. But the truth was, my silence was all I had left. He chose someone else. And in doing that, he chose to ignore me. So now I was giving him what he gave me, nothing. The wedding was now 10 days away. I hadn't RSVP'd. I didn't plan to. I folded the invitation neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I placed it in the trash. The days after I threw away the wedding invitation felt like floating in thick, heavy water. I was moving, breathing, going through the motions, but everything felt slow, disconnected. At work, he acted like nothing had changed. His messages still popped up on my screen throughout the day. Funny memes. Questions about reports. Even a picture of a restaurant he thought we should try, after the honeymoon, of course. I didn't respond. Not in the way I used to. I kept things formal. Short. Polite. The wall I had built was invisible, but it was there. And he felt it. I saw it in his eyes during meetings. I heard it in the awkward silences between conversations. He knew something was off. He just didn't know how to fix it, or maybe he didn't think he had the right to try. A week and a half before the wedding, he brought me lunch. Left it on my desk without saying anything, just like old times. I didn't touch it. I let it sit there all afternoon before throwing it away, unopened. He noticed. He always noticed. That evening, as I was packing up to leave, he stood at the door of my office, leaning on the frame like he used to. "Hey," he said gently. "Got a second?" I paused, then nodded. He stepped inside but didn't sit. His hands were in his pockets, nervous. "You've been distant." I kept my face blank. "Busy." "Right." He hesitated. "Is this about the wedding?" I met his gaze. "Should it be?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Maybe. I just thought you'd be happy for me." "Why?" That caught him off guard. "Because you're he stopped himself. "You've always been there for me. That doesn't mean I owe you my happiness." The silence stretched between us. I saw something flicker across his face, regret, maybe, or realization, but he didn't say anything. I picked up my bag. "Good luck with the planning." And I walked out. He didn't follow. That weekend, I went to a bookstore across town just to be anywhere but home. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to remember. But no matter how many pages I flipped through, my mind kept returning to the same question: when had he decided I wasn't the one? Because surely, it hadn't happened overnight. He must have known for weeks. Months, even. All that time he was texting me, showing up at my apartment, making plans. Was he already with her? Had he already made the choice? I would never know. And I was done asking. By Monday, he looked more tired. There were bags under his eyes, and his smile didn't quite reach like it used to. I didn't ask why. We sat through the weekly strategy meeting, and when he tried to make small talk afterward, I simply nodded and walked away. 2 days later, another message. "You're not coming to the wedding, are you?" I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed a few words. Deleted them. Then typed again. No, that was it. No explanations. No drama. Just the truth. He didn't reply. 3 days before the wedding, the team threw him a small celebration during lunch. Cake, decorations, champagne and plastic cups. She came too. Caroline. Tall, graceful, smiling. I watched from a distance, pretending to scroll through my phone. She didn't know who I was. Just another colleague. Another face in the room. But he saw me. He kept glancing over. Even while holding her hand, even while everyone clapped and laughed around him, his eyes kept flicking to me. I looked away. After the gathering, I went back to my desk. 5 minutes later, he followed. Closed the door behind him. "I wish you'd talk to me," he said quietly. I did. "You didn't listen." He didn't argue. Just stood there, eyes pleading. I never meant to hurt you. I nodded slowly. But you did. He looked down. I didn't think it would feel like this. What? Guilt. I tilted my head. Regret? He swallowed. Everything. I stared at him for a moment. Then said softly, you made a choice. You don't get to mourn what you abandoned. His eyes widened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No words came out. Good luck, I said, turning back to my screen. You should go. You've got a wedding to get ready for. He lingered for a moment, then finally walked out. And I finally allowed myself to breathe. Not cry. Not collapse. Just breathe. Because for the first time, he saw what silence could do. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. But because silence was the only truth left between us. And it was loud. The night before his wedding, I didn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because I couldn't stop thinking. About the irony. About how someone can be part of your everyday for years, and then, just like that, be gone, without a proper goodbye, without even admitting what you were to each other. He never said, I love you. Neither did I. But we had both acted like it was something more. The late-night drives, the emergency calls, the meals shared in silence, it wasn't friendship. Not really. Not in the way people define it. And maybe that was the mistake. We lived in that in-between space for too long. Comfortable. Familiar. Silent. Until one of us broke it. And now here we were. One day before he became someone else's husband. I thought about deleting his number. Blocking him. Removing all traces of him from my life. But that felt like admitting defeat. And I wasn't defeated. Just done. Mid-morning, a message popped up. Can I see you today? Just for a bit. I stared at it for a long time. A month ago, I would have replied instantly. Now, I made him wait. Not to punish him, but because my silence wasn't just an absence of words anymore, it was my boundary. After 2 hours, I sent, where? He replied with a location. Our favorite coffee shop. The one we used to sit in every Friday after work, tucked into the corner booth by the window. I almost didn't go. But then I thought, one last time. I arrived 10 minutes late. He was already there, coffee in hand, wearing that anxious look he got when something was bothering him. He stood when he saw me, unsure whether to hug me or sit back down. I slid into the booth without a word. He followed. We sat in silence for a minute. Just like old times, only this time the air was different. He finally spoke. You look tired. So do you. He tried to smile, but it faltered. Tomorrow's the big day. I nodded. Yeah. He stared at his coffee. I thought I'd feel more excited. I didn't respond. Just waited. After a pause, he said, you not coming hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him. Did you expect me to celebrate you choosing someone else over me? He flinched. It wasn't like that. Then what was it? I don't know, he admitted. I didn't think. I didn't think we needed to define what we were. And now you're defining it with someone else. He ran a hand through his hair. Caroline is safe. She's kind. She loves me. And I wasn't? I asked, voice calm. He looked up, eyes full of something he couldn't say out loud. You were unpredictable, he said slowly. I never knew what you felt. I laughed, short and dry. I was always there. You just never looked close enough. He sank back in his seat. I didn't want to lose you. And now you have. Those words settled heavy in the air between us. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. It's not too late. If you said something, anything, I raised an eyebrow. You want me to stop your wedding for you? No, he said quickly. I want to know if I made the biggest mistake of my life. I picked up my cup, let the heat warm my hands. Then said quietly, if you're asking that question the day before your wedding, you already know the answer. He didn't say anything after that. Just stared at me, searching for something I wasn't going to give him anymore. When I stood to leave, he reached out instinctively, touching my wrist. Please. I looked down at his hand, then at him. You chose her. I stayed silent. That was the moment we ended. You just didn't hear it. I walked out without another word. He didn't follow. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. Not because I was free of pain, but because I had finally accepted the truth. We had our chance. He let it pass. And I wasn't going to beg for it back. That night, I turned off my phone. No messages. No calls. No temptation to check if he was having second thoughts. Because even if he was, it didn't matter anymore. Tomorrow, he would stand at the altar. And I wouldn't be there. The sun rose bright and unbothered, as if it didn't care that today was the day he would marry someone he wasn't sure about. I didn't set an alarm. I didn't need to. I woke up naturally, my body calm for the first time in weeks. It was strange, how a day that should have broken me felt more like a quiet exhale. There was no anger. No tears. Just peace. Because I wasn't going. And he knew that. I had said it plainly. And still, part of him had hoped. That I'd change my mind. That I'd show up at the last minute, dressed in something soft and forgiving, and give him the excuse he didn't have the courage to take for himself. But I wouldn't give him that. Not anymore. Across town, he stood in front of a mirror, adjusting a tie with fingers that trembled slightly. His best man made a joke. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone around him buzzed with excitement, relatives, photographers, planners with clipboards. No one saw the cracks forming behind his practiced smile. Only he noticed the absence. He checked his phone again. Still no message. No last-minute call. Nothing from me. And that was louder than any screaming match we never had. As guests took their seats by the lakeside venue, the music played low and elegant. A breeze moved over the water, soft and gentle. Everything looked perfect. But inside him, it wasn't. He kept scanning the crowd. Looking for a face that would never appear. Hoping for eyes he knew too well. For the only face that mattered before he ever said, I do. But I wasn't there. The officiant asked if he was ready. He nodded. But his hands were cold. His jaw tight. Then she walked down the aisle. Caroline. Beautiful in a way that made strangers sigh. Her dress simple and graceful. Her smile warm and full of certainty. He tried to match that certainty. He tried to hold on to her gaze like it meant everything. But it didn't. Not to him. Not when, just hours ago, his heart had been sitting across from someone else, someone who didn't cry, didn't fight, didn't beg. Someone who just walked away. The ceremony began. Words were said. Vows repeated. He spoke them clearly. He smiled at the right moments. Held her hands when expected. But the entire time, a single sentence played in his mind on repeat. You don't get to mourn what you abandoned. When the officiant said, you may kiss the bride, he leaned in. But his eyes were already drifting, searching, breaking. They kissed. The guests clapped. And yet, in his chest, nothing moved. I didn't watch the live stream. Yes, there was one. A polite link emailed out to guests who couldn't attend. I got it, of course. Never opened it. Instead, I went for a walk. Past bookstores, street vendors, a man playing the violin under the shade of a tree. The world was moving on, just as it always did. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. At the reception, everyone laughed and danced. Toasts were made. Caroline was radiant, glowing in her new title, Mrs., but he was quiet. He moved through the room like a man underwater. Slow. Distant. Smiling for photos and nodding at compliments, but barely there. When they played the song he once swore reminded him of me, his fingers curled tightly around the edge of his champagne glass. No one else noticed. But he did. He remembered the first time he played that song in his car. How I laughed and called it cheesy. How he smiled and said, yeah, but it's you. And now, I wasn't. At one point during the evening, he stepped outside. alone. Away from the noise, the flashing cameras, the cheers. He stared out at the water and pulled out his phone. Opened our old messages. Scrolled up through years of shared words, dumb jokes, pictures of sunsets and coffee cups. He typed something. Then deleted it. Then typed again. You were never just a friend to me. He hovered over send. But didn't press it. Instead, he locked the screen, slid the phone into his pocket, and walked back inside. He had made his choice. But my silence, it had made its impact. And now, even in a room full of people, beside the woman he married, with music and lights and love all around him, he felt alone. The wedding was over. The applause had faded. The pictures were posted. And reality settled in. They came back from their short honeymoon, smiling for others, but quieter in private. Caroline looked content, as if nothing was amiss. She arranged the flowers on their kitchen counter and made plans to redecorate the guest room. She wore her ring proudly and told friends how lucky she felt. He tried to mirror her joy. But it cracked at the edges. Every time he looked at her, he couldn't stop remembering the way I looked at him that last time, calm, distant, finished. Not angry. Not broken. Just done. And somehow, that haunted him more than anything. One morning, while Caroline was still asleep, he unlocked his phone and stared at my name in his contacts. He hadn't messaged me since the wedding. Neither had I. He kept hoping I'd be the one to break the silence. That I'd say something. Anything. But I didn't. He typed, "How are you?" Then deleted it. Then, "I can't stop thinking about you." Deleted again. He sighed, locked the screen, and got up to make coffee. That's how it went for weeks. Smiles in public. Quiet in private. Caroline didn't seem to notice at first. Or maybe she did, but thought it was just the post-wedding adjustment. But he noticed. He noticed how he didn't laugh the same way. How nothing tasted the same. How every silence in the apartment reminded him of mine. Because my silence had weight. It echoed. He tried to talk to old friends. Asked about me in casual tones, like he wasn't desperate to hear my name. But people had picked up on what happened. They didn't say much. Just vague nods, uncomfortable glances, polite shrugs. He was the man who married someone while still haunted by another. Eventually, Caroline asked. One evening after dinner, while folding laundry, she said, "You've been distracted." He looked up from his chair. "What do you mean?" She kept her tone light. "You barely speak. You don't laugh." I thought maybe work, but, he rubbed his temples. "Just tired." She studied him for a long moment. "Is it her?" He didn't answer. That silence, too, spoke volumes. Caroline didn't cry. She just nodded. I knew. Even before the wedding, I knew. I didn't mean to, I know. They didn't fight. She didn't scream. There were no accusations. Just more silence. The kind that fills a home like fog. The kind that settles into the furniture, the walls, the bed. Meanwhile, I lived my life. I got a promotion. Moved into a new apartment. Threw away the last mug he'd left behind years ago. Started reading again. Sleeping better. He heard about it through others. Saw glimpses of me in passing, through stories, through photos. I was smiling. I looked lighter. And that, somehow, crushed him more than anything. Because I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I had just let go. One rainy Sunday, he sat in his car outside the place where we used to meet for coffee. He stared at the familiar window, the booth where we once shared silence and smirks, where we built something neither of us ever dared name. He thought about going inside. Ordering our usual. Hoping I might walk in by coincidence, like fate had forgiven him. But he didn't. He stayed in the car. Rain tapping gently against the windshield. Hands on the wheel. Regret in his chest. This was what silence did. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. Unrelenting. It gave no answers. Offered no closure. Only space. Space that stretched wider with each day. He finally understood. I hadn't stayed quiet to punish him. I had stayed quiet because I had nothing left to say. He began waking up before dawn. Not for work. Not for anything important. Just because sleep no longer came easy. Caroline had stopped asking questions. She had grown used to the quiet, the distance. They still ate together, still exchanged pleasantries, but everything between them had cooled to a manageable politeness. It was like living with a well-mannered stranger. And maybe that's what marriage was to him now, a house filled with things, but not meaning. He saw me once. It was accidental. At a bookstore downtown. I was browsing alone, flipping through a paperback with a slight smile on my lips. I looked peaceful. Different. Not because I had changed physically, but because something heavy had lifted off of me. I hadn't seen him. He stepped behind a shelf, heart racing like a boy caught in something he shouldn't be doing. His fingers itched to come over, to speak, to say all the things he never said when it mattered. But he didn't. He watched from the shadows as I paid for the book and walked out, still unaware of his presence. My silence didn't just remain, it grew. It followed him now, even in places I didn't mean to be. That night, he came home to Caroline sitting at the kitchen table, going over some documents. She glanced up briefly. "You're late." "I saw her," he said. Caroline blinked. "Oh." He dropped his keys. She looked happy. "Good," she replied quietly, and went back to her papers. He sat across from her and stared for a long time. I never gave her anything real. But she still gave me more than I deserved. Caroline didn't answer. He leaned forward. "Do you ever wonder if you married someone who was only half here?" She looked up then, tired but kind. "I don't wonder. I know." And for once, he didn't try to deny it. Days passed. Then weeks. The routine remained. But cracks widened. Their conversations got shorter. Their silences stretched longer. One evening, Caroline stood at the door with a suitcase. He raised an eyebrow. "You're going somewhere?" She exhaled. "I think we both are. Just in different directions." He didn't argue. Didn't beg. He simply nodded. She added softly, "You loved someone else." And she never had to say a word for it to ruin everything. Then she left. He sat on the couch for hours afterward, staring at the blank television screen. The silence didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt deafening. And that's when it hit him. All the times I had sat next to him, saying nothing, those moments had been full of meaning. Of effort. Of feeling. He just hadn't listened. Now that silence was all he had. And this time, it had nothing to offer. He picked up his phone one last time. Searched for my name. He typed, "I finally understand." But he didn't press send. Because it wasn't for me anymore. It was too late. Some truths arrive long after they're needed. Some realizations don't come with second chances. Meanwhile, I had built a new life, one that no longer orbited him. I didn't wait for closure. I didn't need an apology. I had let go the moment he turned away. And I had healed in the quiet he thought would break me. In the end, it wasn't my silence that shattered him. It was the weight of his own choices echoing back, with no one left to answer.